For 17 years, my mother kept a door in our house that none of us were allowed to open. She told us it was where she stored the winter quilts and my dead sister's things. And we believed her, because in an Amish home, you do not question your mother, and you do not touch what grief has locked away. I was 31 years old the night I finally opened it, and what I found on the other side changed everything I thought I knew about the woman who raised me, about our church, and about the God we were all so sure we understood. My name is Rebecca Zook. I grew up in a plain, old order Amish community in Holmes County, Ohio, the kind of place where the roads still turn to mud in April, and the loudest sound at night is a horse shifting its weight in the barn. We had no electricity, no telephone in the house, no car. My father, Amos Zook, farmed 60 acres of corn and oats and kept a small dairy herd, and my mother, Naomi, ran the house the way her mother had, and her mother before that. Bread on Monday, wash on Tuesday, church every second Sunday in a neighbor's home. We were 7 children. I was the youngest. And above all of us, older than me by 19 years, was my sister, Miriam. I never really knew Miriam. She left before I could form a solid memory of her face. What I have instead are pieces other people gave me. My brother Eli said she had a laugh that carried across the whole field. My aunt said she was headstrong, that she asked too many questions in a place where questions were not welcome. And my mother said almost nothing at all. When Miriam's name came up, my mother would go still, the way water goes still before ice, and she would find something that needed doing with her hands. Because Miriam had done the one thing our people never forgive. She left. During her rumspringa, the running around years, she got into a car with an English boy and she never came back. And when the bishop came to sit with my parents at the kitchen table, when they gave her every chance to kneel and confess and return, she said no. So the church did what the Ordnung requires. They put her under the Maidung, the shunning. To the Amish, the Maidung is not cruelty. That is what they will tell you. It is love. It is a rope thrown to a drowning soul, a way of saying, come back, we are still here. But I have lived it, and I will tell you what it looks like from inside a family. It looks like a name that stops being spoken. It looks like an empty chair that no one is allowed to grieve out loud. It looks like a mother who cannot write to her own daughter, cannot sit at the same table with her, cannot take food from her hand, because the church has drawn a line, and to cross it is to be cut off yourself. I have thought a great deal since about what it must have been for my mother in those years. She had 8 children in all, and she lost the oldest one not to sickness, not to God, but to a rule. That is a particular kind of grief. You cannot bury it and you cannot heal it, because the person is still out there in the world, still breathing, still yours, and you are not allowed to reach them. My aunt told me my mother did not cry when Miriam left. She said Mem just went quieter and quieter, year by year, like a stove burning down, until the woman I grew up with was mostly ash and duty, with a small hot coal of something hidden at the center, and none of us knew what the coal was. Now I do. Miriam left in 1989. I was born in 1990. I never met her, and for as long as I can remember, that locked door at the end of the upstairs hall was simply part of the house, like the crack in the plaster or the third stair that groaned when you stepped on it. It was Mem's room. It was where she kept Miriam's things. You did not go in. There were rules in our house about that door, and like all the deepest rules, nobody ever said them out loud. You did not knock on it. You did not clean it, though every other room got scrubbed to the corners each spring. You did not mention the light that sometimes showed under it late at night, a soft lantern glow in the crack between the door and the floor. Once, when I was 8, a cousin came to stay, a boy from the next district, and he went up the stairs to explore, and he put his hand on that door, and my mother crossed the whole house in about 4 steps and took him by the collar so hard his feet nearly left the floor. She did not shout. She never shouted. She just looked at him with a face like a shut gate and said, "Not that one." And the boy came down white as milk and would not go up the stairs again the whole week he stayed. I remember thinking my mother had a strength in her that had nothing to do with her arms. Except that sometimes, late at night, I heard sounds from behind it. I was maybe 6 the first time. I woke needing the outhouse, and I heard something on the other side of that door. Not a mouse, not the wind. A sound like breathing, slow and heavy, and then a soft knock, knock, knock 3 times. Patient, like someone tapping a rhythm they had tapped 1,000 times before. I stood in the dark hallway with my bare feet cold on the boards and my heart going fast, and then my mother's hand was on my shoulder. "Go back to bed, Rebecca," she said. Quiet, steady, but her hand was shaking. "Mem, there's something in Miriam's room." "There's nothing. Go to bed." I went, but I did not sleep. And in the morning, when I looked at my mother across the breakfast table, she looked back at me with a face I did not have a name for yet. I know it now. It was the face of someone carrying a weight so heavy they have stopped feeling their own arms. If you have ever loved someone who is keeping a secret from you, you know that feeling of a door in the house of another person, a room you are not allowed into. Stay with me, because everything I understood about my family was wrong, and the truth was living 12 feet from where I slept every night for 17 years. I grew up. That is what children do, even in a house with a locked door. I learned to sew and can and milk. I learned the hymns from the Ausbund, the slow ones that stretch a single line across 5 minutes. I learned to keep my eyes down when the bishop spoke and to say, "Denki, thank you," and to want nothing the world outside our fences had to offer. But I never stopped hearing the sounds. As I got older, they got harder to explain away. A cough in the night, the scrape of a chair. Once, in the deep quiet of a February morning, I swear I heard someone humming, not a hymn, a tune I did not know, high and thin and strange, and then it stopped all at once, the way a bird stops when a shadow crosses the yard. I asked my father about it once, when I was 12. We were in the barn and he was rubbing liniment into the shoulder of our lame mare, and I felt brave in the way you only feel brave with your father's back turned to you. "Dad, what does Mem keep in Miriam's room?" His hands went still on the horse. He did not turn around. "That's your mother's business," he said. "Not yours, not mine." "But I hear things. At night." He turned then, and my father, who I had never once seen afraid of anything, not a runaway team, not a barn fire, not the winter that took half our herd, my father looked afraid. "Rebecca," his voice was low, "some things a family carries. It doesn't set them down and it doesn't show them around. Do you understand me?" I did not. But I said yes, because that is what you say. He died the next spring. A heart that simply stopped one afternoon while he was mending fence in the north field. He was 58. We buried him in the plain way, in a plain box, and the whole community came. And my mother stood at the grave with her hands folded and her back straight, and did not weep where anyone could see her. That night I heard her go up the stairs. I heard the key in the lock of Miriam's room, and I heard her voice through the wall, low and broken, saying words I could not make out, and then a second voice answering, deeper, a man's voice, or nearly. I lay in my bed and I told myself it was grief. Grief makes people talk to the dead. My mother was talking to Miriam, to my father, to God. That was all. That is what I told myself for another 18 years. Now, I have to tell you about the money, because it is part of how the truth finally came out, and because it shows you what my mother was willing to do. We were not a rich family, but we were not poor either. The farm did well enough, and yet all my growing up years, my mother sold things, quilts mostly. She was the finest quilter in 3 church districts, and English tourists would pay $200, $300 for one of her wedding ring patterns. But she never seemed to have money. When I got older and helped her with the accounts, I could not make the numbers meet. She sold 4 or 5 quilts a season. Where did it go? I asked her once. She said, "The Lord provides and the Lord takes. Don't count what isn't yours to count." But I had seen the envelopes. Twice a year, a man came to our farm, English. He drove a gray car and he wore a gray coat, and he did not stay more than 10 minutes. He and my mother would stand at the far edge of the yard by the willow, and she would hand him an envelope, thick with folded bills, and he would give her a smaller envelope in return, and then he would drive away. I asked her who he was. She said he was a man who helped her sell quilts in the city. I believed her because I wanted to. I was wrong about that too, but I was closer than I knew. My mother got sick in the winter I turned 31. It came on slow and then fast, the way it does. A cough that would not leave. Weight falling off her. By March, she could not climb the stairs. We moved her bed down into the front room, and my sister Katie and I took turns sitting with her through the nights. And here is the thing I could not understand. My mother, who had never in my whole life let anyone but herself go up to that locked room, was now unable to climb the stairs. And every night around 10 o'clock, she would grow agitated. She would grip my hand and say, "The door, Rebecca, the door. It has to be fed, it has to be. Katie, the tray." We thought it was the fever talking. We thought her mind was going soft with sickness. Katie would say, "Yes, ma'am, we'll see to it." And my mother would settle, and we would look at each other over her bed and shake our heads. But one night, when Katie had gone home to her own family, and I was alone with my mother, she woke at 10 o'clock with her eyes clear and sharp as I had not seen them in weeks. She grabbed my wrist. Her grip was iron. "Rebecca, listen to me. You are not a child. I have kept you a child in this because I had no choice, but I have no more time." She stopped to breathe. It cost her. "Upstairs. The key is behind the loose brick in the chimney, in the sewing room. Third brick up, left of the flue. You go up, tonight. There is a boy up there. His name is Gideon. He is your nephew. He is 17 years old, and he has never in his life set foot outside this house, and if I die without telling you, he will die up there alone." I did not move. I could not. The room seemed to tilt. "Mem," I said, "you're not well. "I am dying," she said, "and I am not confused. Gideon is Miriam's son. Now go, before I lose the strength to have told you it all. I want you to understand what it is to have the foundation of your whole life pulled out from under you in the space of a single breath. Everything I thought was solid ground turned to water. A boy, a nephew, 17 years old, in our house. And in that instant, 100 things I had explained away rearranged themselves into a shape I could not look at directly. The breathing, the humming, the coughs, the envelopes, the trays of food I had seen my mother carry up the stairs my whole life and thought nothing of. Because a mother carries food, that is what she does. I went to the sewing room. My hands did not feel like mine. I found the loose brick, third up, left of the flue, and behind it a key, cold and old and wrapped in a scrap of blue cloth. I went down the hall to the door I'd never once opened in 31 years. I put the key in the lock, and I stood there for a long moment, with my heart slamming against my ribs, because I understood that whoever I was before I turned that key, I would not be her afterward. I turned it. The room was warm, that was the first thing. A small coal stove in the corner, banked low. And it was not a storeroom, it was a bedroom, and more than a bedroom. There was a narrow bed, neatly made, a wooden chair, a shelf of books, so many books, more books than I had ever seen in one place. English books, with cracked spines and pages soft from handling. There were drawings pinned to every inch of the walls. Hundreds of them. Birds, mostly. Every bird you could imagine. Drawn in pencil and colored with what looked like the stub ends of crayons. And every one of them perfect, alive, ready to lift off the paper. And in the chair by the window, in the light of a single lantern, sat a young man. He was thin, pale in the way of someone who has never felt the sun. His hair was dark, like Miriam's was said to have been, and when he turned to look at me, I saw that one side of his face was different from the other, the muscles pulling in a way that made his expression hard to read, and I understood, later, that he had been born that way, that this was part of why my mother had done what she did. But his eyes were clear and quick and frightened and hopeful all at once, and they were my mother's eyes, and they were mine. The room told its own story before he said a word. On the shelf, beside the books, there was a row of small things lined up with great care. A blue jay feather, a dried oak leaf, a smooth brown stone, a wasp's nest gone gray and papery. And I understood what they were. They were the world, brought to him one piece at a time by an old woman who could not give him the world itself. She had carried these up the stairs the way other mothers carry a child to the shore to see the ocean. Here, this is a leaf. This is what the tree does in October. This is a feather from the kind of bird you like to draw. My mother had been bringing Gideon the outdoors in her apron pockets for 17 years. One leaf, one stone, one feather at a time. He looked at me, and in a voice rusty from a lifetime of whispers, he said, "Are you Rebecca? Gross Mommy said you would come one day. She said you had a kind face." I nodded because my voice would not come. "You look like her," he said, "like Gross Mommy, and like the picture in my head of my mother. I made a picture of her in my head from the things Gross Mommy told me. A laugh that goes across a whole field. I don't know what a whole field looks like exactly. I've seen the near part out the window, but I made it as big as I could." He tilted his head, studying me with those quick, clear eyes. "Is it bigger than I think? The field?" "Yes," I managed. "Much bigger." "Good," he said, and he smiled. And even with the pull on one side of his face, it was the sweetest thing I had ever seen. I hoped it would be. I could not speak. I dropped to my knees on the wooden floor of that impossible room, and this boy, this nephew I had lived beside for 31 years and never known, this boy who had drawn 1,000 birds he had never seen fly, reached out and touched my hair the way you touch something you are afraid is not real. "Don't cry," he said. "Gross Mommy cries. I don't like when she cries. Are you going to take me outside?" She promised. She said when the community understood, I could go outside. If you have made it this far into Gideon's story, I'm asking you now to stay with me. Because what my mother did next, from her deathbed, and what our community did when the truth came out, is the part I have carried for the rest of my life. And it is the part I most need someone to hear. I went back downstairs. I do not remember the stairs. I came to my mother's bed and I knelt beside it and I took her hands and I said, "Mem, tell me. Tell me all of it. I need to understand." And she did. In the small hours of that night, with the lantern low and Gideon's footsteps soft on the boards above us, my mother told me the truth she had carried alone for 17 years. Miriam had not simply run off with an English boy. She had fallen in love, and she had married him. A plain enough young man named Thomas, who worked in a machine shop in Columbus. And for a few years, she had been happy. My mother knew this. My mother, in secret, breaking the Maidung in a way that could have gotten her shunned herself, had written to Miriam, had met her twice a year in the city, at a diner, and held her hand under the table where God could see, but the church could not. That was the envelopes. That was the gray man in the gray car. He was not a quilt dealer. He was a driver, an Englishman named Harold who had known my mother for 20 years, who drove her to the city and back and never once told a soul. The money was not from quilts alone. It was going to Miriam, and later it was going to keep Gideon alive. Because Miriam had died. She was 26. There was a baby coming, and something went wrong, and she died in an English hospital giving birth to a son, and the son lived, but he was born with a twisting of the face and a weakness in one leg, and the young father, Thomas, was so broken by losing his wife that he could not care for a child at all, let alone a child who would need more than most. He came to my mother. He drove out to our farm in the dead of a January night, 17 years before, and he stood in our yard with a bundle in his arms, and he wept, and he said, "I can't. Naomi, I can't. I don't have it in me. But you're her mother. He's yours by blood, please." And my mother took the child. Now understand what that meant. She could not tell the community. A child of a shunned daughter, born of a marriage outside the faith, would carry the stain of the Maidung. The bishop, a hard man named Amos Byler, would never have allowed the child to be raised in the church. At best, my mother believed, they would have sent the boy to the English authorities, to a home, to strangers, a disabled child no one wanted. At worst, they would have shunned my mother too, for having broken the band to help her daughter in the first place. And then who would care for him at all? And there was my father to think of. My father, who knew. My father, who had wept in the barn and then said, "Some things a family carries." My father, who had built the coal stove into that upstairs room with his own hands and never once let it be known. So they hid him. They hid a living child in the back of a farmhouse, and they raised him in secret. And they loved him, God help them. They loved him so much that they gave up their own standing before their church and their God to keep him warm and fed and taught. My mother taught Gideon to read. She smuggled books to him one at a time. English books from the library in the city, brought back in the false bottom of her quilt basket. She taught him his letters and his numbers and his scripture. She could not send him to school, so she became his school. For 17 years and an hour stolen here and an hour there, she gave him the whole world in words, because she could not give him the world itself. And Gideon drew birds, because from his window, the one window in that room, he could see the sky and he could see the birds crossing it. And he wanted more than anything in his life to know what it felt like to be out there under it. So he drew them 1,000 times. A boy who had never stood in an open field, drawing wings. "I did wrong, Rebecca," my mother said to me, and it was the only time in my life I ever heard her say those words. I lied to my children. I lied to my church. I broke the ban, and I hid a soul from the sight of the people. Maybe I damned myself doing it. I have prayed on it every day for 17 years, and I still don't know. But I know this. If God gave me that boy to keep, then keeping him was the one true thing I ever did. And now I need you to finish it. I need you to take him out into the light before I go, so I can leave this earth knowing he isn't a secret anymore. She died 4 days later. But before she died, I did what she asked, and it did not go the way any of us thought it would. I went to the bishop. Bishop Amos Byler was old by then, past 80, and the hardness that had frightened me as a girl had worn down into something quieter. I sat in his kitchen and I told him everything. I watched his face as I did it, waiting for the anger, for the judgment, for the words that would put my dying mother under the ban in her last days on earth. He was silent for a long time. His old hands were flat on the table, and then he did something I will never forget. He got up, this man of 80-some years, and he went to the window and he stood there looking out at his own fields, and his shoulders began to shake. "I knew Miriam," he said at last. "I baptized her. I put her under the Maidung with my own mouth, because that is the Ordnung, and I believed, God forgive me, I believed I was saving her soul." He turned around and his eyes were wet. "I never once thought about the child. In all my years of keeping the fence around this flock, I never once thought that Mercy might be living 12 feet from where your mother slept, and that I had made it a crime." He came to the farm the next morning, and this is the part that still, all these years later, can bring me to tears in the middle of an ordinary day. The whole community came. Word had gone out the way it does among us, faster than any telephone, and by mid-morning, the yard was full of buggies, men in black hats, women in white caps. The people who had drawn the line that made Gideon a secret were standing in our yard, and I did not know if they had come in anger, or in judgment, or in what. I have to tell you about the hour before that, because it was the hardest hour of my life. Gideon did not want to come down. 17 years he had lived behind that door, and the door had been the whole shape of safe to him. When I told him the people were in the yard, that they had come to meet him, he backed into the corner by the stove and shook his head and said, "No, no. Grossmommy says the people can't know. If the people know, they take me away. She says it every day. Don't let the people know, Gideon." He was 17, and he curled up small as a child, and I did not know how to undo 17 years of a fear that had kept him alive. So I did the only thing I could think of. I sat down on the floor beside him, the way you would with a spooked animal, and I did not touch him. And I said, "Gideon, your gross mommy told me a secret to tell you. She said, tell Gideon the day has finally come, the day she promised. She said you'd know what it meant." And his head came up, and he said, in a whisper, "The going outside day?" And I said, "Yes, the going outside day." And he was quiet a long moment, and then he stood up, and he reached over to the shelf, and he took down the blue jay feather and held it in his fist, and he said, "All right, I'm ready. I've been ready my whole life." And that undid me worse than any of it. Bishop Amos went up the stairs. He asked me to bring Gideon down, and I did. I took my nephew by the hand, this boy who had never been outside, and I walked him down the groaning staircase and through the front room where my mother lay dying. And she opened her eyes and she saw us, and she smiled, and she said one word, "Go." I opened the front door, and I walked Gideon out into the light for the first time in his life. I will tell you exactly what he did, because I want you to see it the way I saw it. He stopped in the doorway. The sun hit his face, and he flinched and put up his hand, and then slowly, he lowered it. He looked up at the sky, the open, enormous, endless sky he had only ever seen through one small window. And a sound came out of him that I had never heard from any person before, a sound of pure disbelief and joy. And then, right then, a flock of starlings lifted off the barn roof and wheeled across the blue altogether. Gideon watched them fly. 17 years he had drawn those birds, and now he watched them fly, and the tears ran down his crooked, beautiful face, and he whispered, "They're faster than I drew them. I didn't know they were so fast." Nobody in that yard said a word. And then old Rebecca Miller, the midwife, near 90, walked up to Gideon and she took his hand and she said, "Welcome, child. We've been missing you, and we didn't even know it." And that broke it. The whole yard moved at once. They came to him. They touched his shoulder and his hair. The women wept. The men, who do not weep, looked at the ground and cleared their throats and looked away and looked back. The bishop raised his hand for quiet. "We did a wrong thing," he said to all of us, "when we let the band become a wall a child could die behind. Naomi Zook broke the Ordnung, and I am telling you today before all of you that if the Ordnung says a grandmother cannot keep her dead daughter's baby alive, then we read the Ordnung wrong, because that is not the God I have served for 60 years. He looked at me. "There will be no shunning in this house. There will only be a homecoming." My mother heard it. She was too weak to come to the door, but I had left the window open, and she heard every word. And Katie, who was sitting with her, told me later that when the bishop said homecoming, my mother closed her eyes and let out a long breath, the longest, slowest breath, like something she had been holding for 17 years. And her face went smooth and peaceful in a way it had not been for as long as any of us could remember. She lived 4 more days, long enough for the community to come one family at a time and sit with Gideon and hear his voice and see his birds. Long enough for a young carpenter named John Hirschberger to spend 3 afternoons teaching Gideon how to whittle, because he saw the way the boy's hands understood shape. Long enough for my mother to see her grandson sit at our table, at a real table, in the light, with people around him who knew his name. On the last afternoon I sat with her, and she was very far away by then, in and out, but she surfaced once, and she looked at me and she said, "Did they let him keep his birds?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. "They love his birds. The bishop asked if he could have one, to hang in his house." She smiled. "Foolish woman," she said, so quiet I had to lean close. All those years I thought I was hiding him to keep him safe, and it was the people who set him free in an afternoon. She closed her eyes. I should have trusted them. I should have trusted them and God both. Remember that, Rebecca. Fear tells you to lock the door. But fear is not the same as love, even when it's wearing love's clothes. She died that night, with her hand in mine, and Gideon asleep in the chair beside her, close enough to touch. The first night of his life he slept in the open house, with no lock on any door between him and the world. That was 12 years ago. Gideon is 29 now. He never did become fully one of us, not in the way the Ordnung would draw it, and the community in its wisdom never asked him to. He was too far behind in some ways, and too far ahead in others. A boy raised on 1,000 English books and his grandmother's scripture, who knew the whole of Pilgrim's Progress by heart and had never once ridden in a buggy. But he found his place. The whittling turned into carving, and the carving turned into something more. Gideon carves birds now, out of wood, songbirds and hawks and herons, and the starlings he watched fly on that first morning. English people come from 4 states to buy them. They sit on shelves in fine houses in the city. These birds, carved by a man who spent 17 years drawing them from a single window. He built himself a small house at the edge of our land, with big windows, the biggest windows the community had ever seen on a plain house, and the bishop, the new one now, only smiled when he saw them. Gideon needed the sky. Everyone understood that. Some debts a whole community pays together. I want to tell you what I found when I finally cleaned out that upstairs room, after my mother was gone. Under the mattress, wrapped in the same blue cloth that had hidden the key, I found a stack of letters. 17 years of them, one for every year of Gideon's life. My mother could barely write English, and her hand was rough, but she had written them anyway, a letter a year, and she had never given them to anyone, because they were not for the living. They were addressed to Miriam. Each one said the same thing in different words. It said, I kept him. I kept your boy. He is well. He is smart, so smart, smarter than any of us. He drew a robin today, and I could have sworn it would sing. Forgive me for the years I let the church keep me from you. Forgive me for being afraid. I am keeping your son the way I could not keep you, and I am telling him every day that his mother had a laugh that carried across the whole field. The last letter, the 17th, was dated the week she got sick. It was shorter than the others. It said only this: Miriam, I am coming to you soon, and I am not coming empty-handed. I am bringing you the whole story of your son, every day of it, so you will not have missed a single one. And I am going to tell God when I see him that if keeping this boy was a sin, then let the sin be mine alone, and let the mercy be Gideon's, because a soul that draws that many birds was meant to be kept. I read those letters sitting on the floor of that little room in the light from the one window, and I understood, finally, the whole of what my mother had been. Not a woman who lied, a woman who loved past the edge of what she was allowed to love, and paid for it in 17 years of silence, and never once set the weight down. People ask me sometimes when they hear the story whether I am angry that I grew up with a nephew behind a locked door and never knew, angry that my mother lied to me my whole childhood, angry at the church that made her afraid. And I tell them no, because I have learned that the world is not made of the clean, hard lines we like to draw through it. There's a line called the Ordnung, and a line called the law, and a line called what people will say. And my mother stepped over all of them. And by every rule she was wrong, and by the only measure that has ever mattered to me, she was the bravest, most faithful person I have ever known. She hid a child from our whole community for 17 years, and she was right to, and the community was right to forgive her. And both of those things are true at once, and I have stopped trying to make them into anything simpler, because life is not simple, and neither is love, and neither, I have come to believe, is God. Gideon keeps one of my mother's letters framed on the wall of his little house, next to the window with the wide view of the sky. It is the last one, the one that ends with the birds. When the light comes in low in the evening, it falls right across the words, and he says he can read it from his workbench without even looking up, because he has it by heart, the way he has everything by heart that his grandmother ever gave him. Last spring, on the anniversary of the day I opened that door, Gideon and I sat on the porch of his house and watched the swallows come back to the barn. He has a way of going still when the birds fly, even now, even after all these years of watching them do the one thing he spent his childhood only able to draw. Do you ever wish it had been different? I asked him. That you'd grown up outside, gone to school, had friends, been free? He thought about it for a long time. That is Gideon's way. He does not rush a thing worth saying. I was free, he said finally. I just didn't know the shape of it yet. He nodded toward the barn, toward the swallows dropping and rising in the gold light. Gross Mammy kept me in a small room, but she gave me the sky through one window and 1,000 books and every hour she could steal, and she never once let me believe I was less than anyone. That's not a cage, Rebecca. That's a nest. You keep something small and warm in a nest, not because you want it small, because you're waiting for it to be strong enough to fly. I did not have anything to say to that. I still don't. So we just sat, the two of us, my mother's grandson and my mother's daughter, and we watched the birds until the light was gone. There's a door at the end of the upstairs hall in the house I grew up in. It has no lock on it anymore. I took the lock off myself the week after my mother died, and I threw the key into the deep part of the creek where no one would ever find it. The room is a sewing room now, full of light, and when my own children ask me what it used to be, I tell them the truth. I tell them it used to be a nest. Some secrets are kept out of shame, and they rot the house that holds them. But some secrets are kept out of love, by people who have run out of any other way to keep the ones they cannot save. My mother's secret was the second kind. It cost her 17 years, and it very nearly cost her soul, and she carried it alone in the dark so that a boy could have a window and a stack of books and a chance someday to walk out into the light and watch the starlings fly. She was wrong to hide him, and she was right to keep him. And if you have ever loved someone enough to do a wrong thing for a right reason, then you already understand my mother better than the whole community understood her for 17 years. The birds still come back to that barn every spring. Gideon still carves them. And somewhere, I have to believe, my mother and Miriam are sitting together at last, at the same table, on the same side of every line that ever kept them apart, watching a boy they both love teach the whole world what it looks like when something that was kept in the dark finally learns to fly. Home is not the place where they let you stay. Home is the place where somebody loved you enough to keep the light on, even when they had to hide it behind a locked door.